Backstory. Throughout the course of my past relationship, my former spouse possessed a distinct and peculiar nature. One that was reminiscent of the sort of madness that is only seen in fictional tales. However, alongside this frenzied behavior, there was an equally fervent determination that drove her actions. Sadly, during our time together, I discovered that she had been unfaithful on numerous occasions and had indulged in some particularly potent drugs while I was away on business, leaving her to care for her 2 children from a previous marriage, as well as our own child. Despite the evidence of her infidelity and dangerous behavior, I made the mistake of believing her promises to change. I allowed myself to be fooled by her attempts to convince me that things would be different. Perhaps my decision was partially against by the fact that her older children had become like my own, due to the untimely passing of their father from cancer when they were still young. Additionally, I couldn't bear the thought of my child growing up in a broken home as I had experienced it in my own childhood. A chance for a new beginning presented itself to us when an opportunity to relocate to a distant location far from the dingy surroundings of my former partner's hometown was presented. We both agreed. For us to make a positive change in our lives. I was offered a prestigious job promotion, and we both saw it as a way for my partner to finally leave her old habits and connections behind and start anew in a fresh and unfamiliar environment. Unfortunately, despite our best intentions, my partner didn't follow through on her promises to change. After a year had passed, not much had changed in our lives. My partner had taken to refurbishing furniture and an attempt to sell it rather than finding a steady job. This new hobby resulted in her spending a significant amount of time at a local store that resold household items from remodeled homes. It was there that she met a man whom I'll refer to as Javier. She even went as far as to introduce me to him during one of her visits, claiming that he was a helpful associate who assisted her in loading heavy items into her truck. However, my instincts began to kick in and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I had this annoying gut feeling that my partner was going to eventually cheat on me with this new acquaintance as she had done with previous men. As a woman in her mid-30s, she was apprehensive about getting older and losing her desirability, so she had a habit of seeking out younger men to make herself feel better. Javier fit this criteria perfectly. And what was even more peculiar was that he bore an uncanny resemblance to her late husband. As another 3 months went by, the arguing between my partner and me had reached an intolerable level. What made things worse was that my partner began to make veiled threats that she would falsely accuse me of touching her children and have me banned from seeing our daughter forever. She also started to insinuate that she would purposely harm herself and blame me for it. At this point, I knew that I had to take matters into my own hands to protect myself and my child. Therefore, I started to covertly record these conversations with my phone, knowing that this would be essential evidence if things were to escalate further. It turned out that my foresight was beneficial in the long run, as it ultimately won me full custody of my child during our divorce proceedings. But that's a story for another time. Just a week later, we had another argument that took place right before Thanksgiving. This was a particularly hurtful time for me, as Thanksgiving was one of my favorite holidays, and it was also the first time we would be spending it alone as a family without any other relatives nearby. Despite this, my partner was more concerned about spending the holiday with Javier and his family. I had no idea that she had started anything with him at that point. It had become quite normal for her older children to witness their mother's erratic behavior, and they had become somewhat desensitized to it. Therefore, she didn't worry about them revealing anything to me. However, my daughter was only 2 years old, and was concerned about the potential impact that these events could have on her well-being. A few days later, still reeling from the disastrous Thanksgiving, I discovered the truth about what had really transpired. The fight between us had escalated to new heights, and it was clear that I had reached my breaking point. I had decided to file for divorce the following Monday, which was only 2 days away. However, before I could take any action, my ex-wife managed to twist one of my text messages and use it as a pretext to involve the police. She had pulled over on a busy 4-lane road with our youngest child in tow and demanded that I leave the vehicle and walk home, which was 4 miles away. When I refused, she called the police and manipulated them into arresting me so that I would be forced to leave the house for the night. Fortunately for me, our city had 247 judges available, and I was released by noon the next day on bail that cost only $100 as it was a $900, as it was a minor charge. My ex-wife had assumed that I would be gone until at least Monday, but her plan had ultimately failed. Despite this, the incident left me feeling even more disillusioned with our marriage and convinced that divorce was the only option for us. As I arrived home after the Thanksgiving Inn, I was surprised to see Javier's car parked outside our house. However, by now, her behavior was hardly shocking to me. So I recorded the scene before even entering the house. After Javier left, I also left, as the kids had school the next day. But the following day, as I went to the court for my initial hearing for the arrest, she requested a temporary restraining order against me. Unfortunately, the court granted it, which meant I was not allowed to enter my home and I was left to pay all the bills, excluding food during the divorce proceedings. Following my lawyer's advice, the situation felt unfair and unjust, but I knew I had to play by the rules to ensure the best outcome for myself and my daughter in the long run. On Wednesday, the court granted me a limited time frame of 6 hours to evacuate my possessions from the house. As I was scheduled to depart for a multi-week job out of town on the same day, my available time was further constrained. This situation presented a daunting predicament since leaving any belongings behind could potentially result in permanent loss. Although my priorities were to pack essentials such as work and casual attire, I could only manage to accommodate 2-3 suitcases at most. Given the time constraints, frustrated and resentful at the imposed limitations, I decided to take advantage of the situation and carry out a small act of revenge. The revenge, throughout the duration of our romantic relationship, which spanned over 4 years, my former partner and I amassed an extensive and eclectic array of adult toys, amounting to an estimated value of around $3,000 to $4,000. We primarily stored our collection in a sizable trunk, resembling the case of a magician, which was a beloved and integral part of our shared experiences. It's important to note that this collection was not solely my partner's possession, as I was the one who had procured most of these items for her. She expressed an avid fondness for these erotic items, regardless of whether we included others in our intimate endeavors or not. Although we had a central location for our collection, she had a few favorites that she kept concealed in peculiar spots like her shoe rack inside her closet. With the time ticking away, I swiftly packed my essential belongings in the first hour and a half, but then came the task of scouring the entire house to locate every single one of her precious hidden treasures. It took me an additional 2 hours to methodically comb through every nook and cranny of the house and gather everything of a risk nature that belonged to her. Finally, with my truck bed loaded with my work essentials, a few suitcases, and the conspicuous magician-like trunk, I departed the property with the little time to spare. I embarked on a lengthy 5-hour drive to reach the hotel of the out-of-town job that awaited me. As I checked in at the hotel, I noticed a large green dumpster located in the back corner of the parking lot. My anger and frustration at the imposed restrictions from the court were still smoldering within me, and the sight of the dumpster was too enticing to ignore. I proceeded to unload all of my ex-partner's adult toys and other explicit items from the trunk and disposed of them in the dumpster. The rush of vindictive satisfaction was hard to ignore as I walked away from the dumpster, feeling a sense of closure and liberation. After spotting the large green dumpster tucked away in the corner of the hotel parking lot, I couldn't resist the opportunity to dispose of the erotic items I had just collected from my ex-partner's belonging. As I pulled my truck around and backed up to the dumpster, I hoisted the heavy and bulky trunk that weighed more than 80 pounds into the bin, relishing the satisfying sound it made as it hit the bottom of the container. While it may not have been a grand gesture, I found immense gratification in the simple act of disposing of the items that had once brought pleasure to my ex-partner. It felt like a small victory to have taken back some control and power, especially since I knew that she would be devastated to lose her stress-relieving collection. Although the divorce proceedings and the potential fallout from my actions weighed heavily on my mind, the brief moment of triumph was enough to give me a sense of temporary relief and respite. As a bonus and side note, I would like to add that the case against me was eventually dropped thanks to a letter my ex-partner wrote to the Day. In the letter, she stated that she was not afraid of me, and that I posed no danger to her. This was the only way to have the restraining order lifted, which would allow me to help her with the kids as she struggled to find work. Despite my eagerness to assist, I made sure to respect the terms of the TRO and avoid any further legal issues. In the end, I was granted full custody of my daughter after the grueling divorce proceedings, which was a major victory and relief for me. Although my marriage had been a tumultuous and painful experience, I knew that my daughter's well-being was my top priority, and I was willing to fight for her at all costs. If you enjoyed the above story, I have plenty more tales to share from my traumatic and challenging marriage. Despite the hardships I faced, I learned valuable lessons about resilience, perseverance, and the power of self-love and respect. Stop. Most of you are not subscribed. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the video. Everything helps for the algorithm.